right, guys, so obviously the NBA trade deadline in about 2 weeks' time, a little less than 2 weeks now. February 3rd, I believe, is the official date coming up here for the Timberwolves, and they've been a popular team to be put in the trade speculation market. Julius Randle trade hasn't really gone down well. We'll talk about that a little later on in the show. Excuse me. But I want to get your guys' opinions on some of these fake trades or proposed trades that we've seen and that we've written about over on Timberwolves on SI. Some of your favorites that you've seen, some that you've come up with yourselves. Joe, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I don't know that there's one that like screams this is my favorite. It's tough because the Timberwolves have so many restrictions, and Nolan O'Hara did a really good job writing about what exactly the being over the second apron means for the Timberwolves. It really is restrictive. It's a lot of salary matching. There's a lot of confusion about can they include two players in a deal? Yes, they can, but it comes with some caveats. But the ones that we've seen, I think the one that's actually my favorite would be the one where I wrote about this the other day. It's a 4-team deal in my mind, and it helps facilitate the Jimmy Butler Bradley Beal situation with the Heat and the Suns. But just to focus on Minnesota, I think it would be great if the Wolves get off of Julius Randle's contract because I don't want him back in Minnesota in 25-26. And there is a threat that he does pick up his $30.9 million player option next season. If I'm Julius Randle, I look in the mirror and I say, I'm 30 years old. I'm not taking that option, even if it is $31 million. I'm signing a long-term contract to play wherever I want to play. There's so much money out there with the TV rights going on right now, and he can get paid, and it might be his last opportunity for a big-time contract. So if I'm Randle, I don't pick up that option. But if I'm Minnesota, I don't let that decision take place. I ship him out wherever he goes this year. It doesn't matter. No hard feelings. If you're in Washington, so be it. You get to choose your free agent destination in the summer. But the deal I like does go to Washington, and the Wolves bring back Malcolm Brogdon, who's he's solid. He's a veteran point guard. The Wolves has some issues at guard right now. He would give them a suitable player for the stretch run, not a championship caliber by any means, in my opinion. But the key here is getting the remaining this season and then 2 years at $10 million a pop for Jonas Valanciunas. That's a big-time rebounding double-double machine. He's not going to fit on the court at the same time as Rudy Gobert, but what he does do is gives you a backup center who can actually rebound, and that to me is the biggest problem with Minnesota right now. They're a terrible rebounding team, and they need to find a solution for that. So I like a deal that sends Julius Randle to Washington or Miami if it's facilitating the Butler deal, and it brings back Valanciunas and Brogdon to Minnesota.
Yeah, there was one I wrote about that Bill Simmons floated on his podcast that I think was probably just kind of offhand from him, where he had the Wolves getting, why am I blanking on it right now?
Middleton.
Chris Middleton from the Bucks, Julius Randle going to Detroit, and then Tobias Harris going from Detroit to Milwaukee. So 3 kind of similarly expensive veterans just moving around. He called it like a Yankee swap in Christmas. And on the surface, it's intriguing in that the Wolves get off of Randle and they get Middleton, who's a guy who's been a number 2 on a championship team before. He's a 3-time All-Star. He was really, really good even just in last year's playoffs. But I don't know if the Wolves do it because Joe mentioned part of getting off of Randle's contract is you don't allow him to make the decision or have the chance to opt into his player option. Chris Middleton has a $34 million player option next year, so it's even more than Randle's. He's a few years older than Randle. He's averaging fewer points and all the other stats this year as he's coming off of, I think, 2 ankle surgeries this offseason. So that doesn't really fix your problem because Middleton seems maybe even more likely than Randle to want to opt into that. And then you've got the whole situation where you might lose Naz Reid and or Nickeil Alexander-Walker. So even though Middleton, I think, makes more sense than Randle from an on-court perspective if he's healthy, that player option next year, I think, isn't something that would appeal to the Wolves. I think if they're going to try to get off of Randle's contract, and they might not be, I mean, the fan base has been really frustrated with him, but there have been some signs recently where he's helping you with his ability to get into the lane and then kick it out for threes, or his ability to finish strong with his left. He's got the second best net rating on the team, which was a surprise to me. I don't think that's a perfect stat, but I think Chris Finch really likes him and is going to try to make this work. But if they do trade him, you're going to want it to somehow be for an expiring contract. So you don't have that big Randle or otherwise contract on the books next year. And then you have the flexibility to keep Nas and power Nas as your starter, keep Nikhil, things
Guys,
like
that's the thing, because we just don't know what the Timberwolves are thinking. A week ago, probably 8-9 days ago, John Krasinski on his podcast, and I consider John to be the most informed, most trustworthy Timberwolves insider on the planet. He's been doing it for decades. He went out and said he thinks it's unlikely they look to trade Julius Randle. But then Dante DiVincenzo sprained his toe, and as we know, that's a grade 3 sprain. He's probably going to miss months, and he may not be back this season. That very well could have changed everything. And Krasinski said before knowing DiVincenzo's injury that things can change quickly in this league. So that might have been an injury that changed Minnesota's outlook on the season, and then maybe changed the outlook on how they view Julius Randle. And then Evan Sidery, who is an NBA insider, and I had barely heard of him outside of seeing some tweets every now and again. But a friend of mine pointed out, well, Brian Windhorst and Dane Moore and Sam Amico, all these guys who are respected NBA insiders, they follow him on X. Does that mean anything? I don't know. But I'm going to give Sidery the benefit of the doubt because he came out yesterday and reported that rival executives believe the Timberwolves will seek a Julius Randle trade. And if that's accurate, we could be looking at the final 13, 14, 15 days of Julius Randle in a Minnesota uniform. It's just that we don't know. But if we were all making the decision, I think if 90% of Minnesotans were making the decision, they would say, bye-bye, Julius. It's time to go, buddy. We don't want you to risk taking that player option next season because our championship window is now in the Anthony Edwards era, and Naz Reid needs to play. Everybody sees it, and I don't know what the Timberwolves are waiting for, but I'm starting to be of the opinion that they are going to move this guy sooner than later.
Tony, if they do move Julius Randle, excuse me, it feels like they're going to have to take a hit somehow in this trade because of Julius Randle's contract. Do you believe that the Wolves will have to take a step back to do that? Or do you think there's a way that they can get a piece that helps them actually be better this year than they have been?
Yeah, I don't want to say the same trade as Will, but I do like that idea, and it's pretty easy to just say trade Julius Randle. I think that's what most people in the fan base are saying, and I do think it's probably the best move for them to make. And I think the Pistons would be the most interesting team to get involved in, the team that makes the most sense. Even on Bill Simmons' podcast, he always talks about using the lesser executives and the teams that make poor decisions, and the Pistons are known to do that. So um, you could ship Julius Randle. They're having a pretty good year. They squeak into the playoffs, and they're like, "Oh, we have this former All-Star on our team." It just makes a lot of sense to get them involved. And I think even if they get someone back like Tobias Harris, let's say the Bucks aren't even involved in that deal, I think the issue with the Timberwolves right now is Julius Randle's not a guy that's going to sit in the corner and just be a catch and shoot three guy. And sometimes on this team specifically, when you have Ant that likes to drive, this year he's shooting a lot more threes, and then you have Rudy Gobert in the paint. A guy like Julius Randle just makes the offense clunky. He's going to put up good numbers. He's a good basketball player, but it doesn't flow as well. And I think they need another guy like a Chris Middleton, like a Tobias Harris, who's comfortable just sitting in the corner shooting threes. And that's just how the NBA works nowadays. And I personally would try to get the Pistons involved. I've even seen just looking, some people just trading Julius Randle for Isaiah Stewart and Tim Hardaway Jr. And that wouldn't be much value on paper, but I think it's just the team's almost like clumped together right now with Julius Randle on the floor, and getting him away, I think, would just open things up more. Me personally, just watching the team. So I think the Pistons are the most interesting team that I think they could trade.
Isaiah Stewart would be an amazing addition in Minnesota. That dude is a menace. I mean, he might be the closest thing to Dennis Rodman since Dennis Rodman. And if you add him to this roster, The defensive capabilities would probably match what they did last season. And we've seen it in spurts this season, but Julius Randle's a massive weakness on that side of the ball. We saw it against Dallas. I felt that he was bodying the bigs down low late in the game, and I'm like, where's this been all season? And that's the thing. You need guys who you know what you're going to get on a night-to-night basis. And Julius Randle is very inconsistent in what he brings. I mean, his numbers are consistent, right? But it's a big box score. There's not a lot that goes beyond that. And I'll say this, guys, before I forget, and if we move on topics or whatever, but one trade that I wouldn't mind seeing, and this might upset a lot of people, is Jaden McDaniels and that Detroit first round pick, or even a second round pick, to Brooklyn for Cam Johnson. Cam Johnson's got 3 years of team control. He's very affordable. I think he's making $500,000 or $1.5 million less per season than Jaden McDaniels. McDaniels had a great game in Dallas, but he, again, is one of those players who you cannot rely on consistently to score points. And that's one of the biggest issues with this team right now in Minnesota is scoring. They're not a great offensive team. So how do you get better offensively? You go get an absolute assassin from downtown, Cam Johnson, who plays good defense, can play the 3 and the 4, and is just a versatile offensive weapon. I mean, he's going to give you 20 a night potentially, whereas Jaden, he's averaging 10. And if everybody's just begging Jaden to get 15, and that doesn't seem to be there. This is year 5. There has to come a point in time where you say, hey, this may not be the best fit. And everybody loves Jaden McDaniels on the defensive side of the ball. And he can hit the 3. But again, you got to find some consistent play. And if you're looking at the roster right now and the moves you've made have debilitated everybody else's skill sets, i.e. the Karl Anthony Towns trade and bringing in Julius Randle, you might have to make some other moves to make up for what I think many people consider to be a mistake at this point. So I'd be open to that. And the reports out there are that Brooklyn has a very high asking price for Cam Johnson, and for good reason. And they want young talent that can win now, and they want draft picks. Well, Jaden McDaniels in that Detroit protected first-round pick would certainly foot that bill. And you look at that pick, and Minnesotans might say, man, we don't have many first-round picks going forward. Well, you have Leonard Miller, you've got Josh Minot, you've got Rob Dillingham, you have Terrence Shannon Jr., you have all of these young guys on your roster who aren't even cracking the rotation right now anyway. What value is the 14th or 15th pick in the draft, 16th pick in the draft, if they're just going to sit on the bench during the championship window? You need pieces that are going to help right now. So if I'm Minnesota, I'm looking at that Detroit pick with a ton of value right now and trying to swing it for a home run type of deal. And if that means Jaden's got to go and Anthony Edwards loses his buddy, so be it. It's the nature of the beast.
I want to touch on both of those real quick. I don't know. Maybe it's just the coming off of the Dallas game and the fact that I'm writing about Jaden and his kind of recent 7-game spurt here. But I don't know if I want to give up on the dream of Jaden McDaniels just yet. And Cam Johnson's a very, very good player, a very good shooter, very good offensive player. But if I think there's a world where Jaden, who's still 24 years old, can start to realize this is how he needs to play, which isn't just shooting threes. It's getting to the rim and using his ridiculous length to finish at the rim and get rebounds and just play big like he did in that Dallas game and start to give you 14, 15 points a night and 6, 7, 8 rebounds and things like that. And I admit we haven't really seen it very much. It's been 5 seasons now. But I don't know. I don't know if I would do Jaden and that Detroit first for Cam Johnson. I don't even know if Brooklyn would do that either, I guess.
Yeah, that could be true.
On the other one, on the Detroit Julius Randle idea, I do kind of like the idea of doing Randle for Isaiah Stewart and Tim Hardaway, because Hardaway is an expiring contract. Stewart's under contract for like $15 million a year for a few more years, who can bring you some of the rebounding and bully ball off the bench that Randle did. Tobias Harris, I don't know if I would have any interest in having him here. He's going to make like almost $27 million next year, and it's just kind of a guy. I guess it's slightly less than what Randle would make, but he's more expensive than he's worth for sure. So just wanted to kind of chime in on those two.
Yeah, you're right.
ideas.
And real quick, and the thing about Julius Randle, the threat of him picking up his player option next season is that inhibits Minnesota's ability to pay Naz Reid and Nickeil Alexander-Walker. So if you're Minnesota and you want both of them back, you kind of have to trade Julius Randle for a guy who isn't under contract for the same amount of money next season or beyond.
Do you think you guys have mentioned this, the potential player option for Julius Randle, do you think with that hanging over the club, with how things have played out this season, the Wolves will obviously never admit it. Do you think there's some buyer's remorse for this trade that kind of sprung up out of nowhere for everybody? Obviously, they were working on it behind the scenes for quite a while. It's clear because of all the pieces involved. But do you think there's some buyer's remorse for how this trade went down and what they got in return for giving away Karl-Anthony Towns, who, yes, would have, because of his contract, would have presented some of the similar problems? But do you think there's some buyer's remorse?
I think maybe, like you mentioned it, they kind of had to trade Cat with the second apron stuff. I mean, they could have made it work for another year and then tried to do something, but they were gonna have to move on from Cat at some point. You can't really trade Rudy Gobert because the interest just isn't the same, um, justifiably. Uh, I guess I question. I have no idea what else was theoretically on the table for them to acquire for Cat. Um, at the time, I was like, all right, Julius Randle, Dante DiVincenzo, that's pretty solid. Randle has maybe been a little disappointing, which I don't know. Some Knicks fans maybe would have said ahead of time that we should have seen that coming. DiVincenzo was just really starting to find his groove, unfortunately, when he got hurt. So without knowing what else they maybe could have gotten, it's hard to say whether they feel too upset about it. Obviously, Cat's had an incredible year with the Knicks, but I don't know. The Wolves probably don't do it again if they have the same opportunity, but then again, I don't know what else was out there. So it's kind of hard to make that declaration in hindsight.
Tony, you were nodding your head. I'm going to let you pipe in there. You seemed very confident about how they do have buyer's remorse. I could be wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I was not a big fan of the trade when it happened. Obviously, I think the next month is going to show if they have buyer's remorse. If they deal Julius Randle, I think Tim Connolly might have had a bigger plan when it happened. But if they keep Julius Randle, I almost think that's kind of admitting that they have buyer's remorse a little bit because it just doesn't seem like it's working necessarily. And it was such a long-term move at the time that it opened the door for things in the future like the Naz Reid extension, like the Nickeil Alexander-Walker extension. But keeping Randall might make that harder. So it's a really interesting thing. And in the short term, I think they probably do have a little bit buyer's remorse. But Tim Connolly has proven that he's one of the more accomplished executives in the NBA. And I think the next month and even the next year, I think that's going to be the fair time to judge the trade totally, because if they make another move, I think it opens the door for a lot of other.
I think you're right. I think there was a master plan behind this whole thing, and they knew that Julius Randle had, this year and next year with the player option. And Chris Finch can say all the right things, how he loves Julius Randle and how he's a playmaker and he can make it fit and make it work. But I mean, you're now 44 games into this thing, and it's not that beautiful. And the overall structure of the team, they were like 32-12 at this point last season. I mean, it's just totally different. But I think there was a master plan behind it, and we're yet to see some of the dominoes to fall. And let's not forget, Karl-Anthony Towns is an all-star starter in New York in his first season there. That's amazing. He deserves it. He's putting up incredible numbers. He's back to playing the 5, where he is, as everybody says, a cheat code in the NBA. But let's not forget how he no-showed in a lot of big-time playoff games, and he totally lost his three-point shot late in the series against Denver, and then he was a kind of a disaster in the first 4 games of that Dallas series last year in the playoffs. So, I mean, we'll see what happens to Cat in New York in the playoffs. If he no-shows like he has in Minnesota over the years, the narrative won't be quite as charming. So, I don't think there's buyer's remorse quite yet, and I think there's more moves to be made.
Switching teams, but staying on the trade topic, we wrote about this, and The Athletic reported this, that the Twins are interested in trading for Padres starter Dylan Cease. Joe, you wrote about how that would form if the Twins were able to pull that off, one of the more dominant starting units in the entire major leagues. Is this possible? Do we see this as a possibility that the Twins are actually going to pull off this kind of a big trade to help them out this season with what little they've done this offseason?
So it's two teams going in opposite directions, where the Padres spent so much freaking money on the roster last year. Then they took their whole offseason, and by all accounts, they were all in on Roki Sasaki. Sasaki signs with the Dodgers. They miss out. I think the Padres have signed one major league player in the offseason so far. The Twins have done none. So it's been really pathetic on both fronts. But the Padres aren't looking at an ownership change. They're looking at some internal disputes, and the reports out of San Diego are that they are shedding salary. Dylan Cease, they sent the farm to Chicago to get him for a season. He was phenomenal last year, and now he's due to make about $13 million this year before he becomes a free agent. I don't know how real it is. I know that Dan Hayes of The Athletic was on the Gleeman and the Geek podcast, and he said he sees it as unlikely that the Twins are a front runner to trade for Cease, but he does think Cease ends up getting traded, it sounds like. Whether it's to Minnesota or not, it remains to be seen. But if you're the Twins, you have everything the Padres need. You've got all this infield depth. You've got all this outfield depth. You've got all of these great prospects. You've got good pitching prospects. If you are the Twins, if I'm Joe Polad, right, I'm looking at this right here saying, I'm trying to sell my franchise for about $1.5 to $1.7 billion. I could go trade for Dylan Cease, agree to pay him $13 million this season, understand that Justin Ishbia and Matt Ishbia, or whoever comes in and buys this team, is going to be more frugal or less frugal with their money, and they'd be willing to pay a guy like Dylan Cease likely, 25, 26, 27, 30 million a year, whatever it takes to get a high-end starting pitcher like that on a long-term deal. I can sell my franchise. And if I'm worried about paying this guy an extra $13 million and I got to fork that over, well, I'll just put that $13 million into the sale price. I'll build it into the price of the team. It's such a simple philosophy, if you ask me. I mean, come on. I'm a business owner. I could figure that out. And I don't know why nobody thinks about it that way. And if I'm the Twins, that's how I am thinking about it. So there's no reason they can't pull this deal off. They have all the assets. It's just a matter of, are the Padres interested? How steep of a prospect are they going to want? Are they going to want Walker Jenkins? Are they going to want Emmanuel Rodriguez? Are they going to want Luke Keyshaw? Those three guys, Dan Hayes says those guys are off limits, right? So if those are off limits and you're not willing to do that, then the deal's dead if that's what San Diego's asking price is. But if it's Andrew Morris, if it's Zebby Matthews, if it's David Festa, if it's even a guy like Joe Ryan or Bailey Ober who have years under team control left and they're very good pitchers right now, you have the assets to make that move happen. So I don't know if it gets done, but all I know is that if you have Dylan Cease with Pablo Lopez and then the rest of these starters, that instantly erases the apathy in Minnesota and brings a ton of excitement into 2025. And if there's one thing this team needs, it is that, because this ownership group in the front office has done nothing to excite fans after a year of disaster. So I would love to see it happen. I don't know if it will happen, but the Twins do have the ammo to at least get a deal done. It's up to them to make it actually reality.
Yeah, I'm skeptical because you mentioned it's a $13 million for Cease. To fit that under these self-imposed payroll restrictions by the outgoing ownership, they would have to shed some salary unless they are going to change that payroll restriction, which there's been no real indication that they're going to. And I agree with you that they should just put it into the sale price, but I don't know if that's how they're planning on operating. To me, it's tough because if you tell me that you're trading for Dylan Cease and then you're gonna extend him and keep him around for a long time, then I'm in, because I think that would be an incredible rotation, like you said, with Cease, Pablo Lopez, Joe Ryan, Bailey Ober. Assuming you don't trade any of those guys, I guess. But there's the risk of you trade for him and then he leaves after a year, and you just gave up 2 or 3 notable prospects to get him, and then I don't like that. Like if they're asking for like Luke Keyshaw and Zebby Matthews, to me, I would do that if you're going to have Cease for a while. But if you're only going to have Cease for 1 year, then that's not worth it. Jenkins and Rodriguez certainly untouchable, but excuse me. I don't know. I think it's tough with the payroll restrictions, the whole kind of awkward situation of transitioning ownership. But man, on paper, that would be a lot of fun to have that kind of rotation.
Can I give you a little hope right here? When we talk about the Minnesota Twins and payroll, this is a quote from Dan Hayes on the Gleeman and the Geek podcast. Quote, "I wouldn't be shocked if there's a tiny bit of upward mobility, like to add a little bit. I'm not talking a lot," he said. "I think it would have to be the right kind of play. Say it was they're switching things on and they say to ownership, look, for $8 million more, if we're willing to eat this $8 million, we can get Dylan Cease. Would that be there? I don't know. I really don't know what that number is," end quote. But upward mobility with the Minnesota Twins payroll when it comes to acquiring a standout arm? I'm just saying,
We're basically the Dodgers.
that should generate a little bit of intrigue.
Yeah, I think that's really optimistic of you to think that, Joe. But yeah, I don't know. I'll believe it when I see it. You obviously want to add players like Dylan Cease to your baseball team when you can. And Will and Joe both made great points that the extension beyond next year, if they do trade for him, would be a big part of the equation. But I'll believe it when I see it if they actually pull off the deal.
Yeah, I'm with you. Before we talk about landing all-star pitchers, how about we add one major league player of any kind to the roster this offseason?
That would certainly be helpful. All right. So
trade Christian Vasquez out of here. Get somebody else.
It would certainly be helpful to see the Twins actually do anything to help their major league squad this offseason. All right, boys, good stuff from you today. Appreciate you stopping by. If you do have the time, do hit subscribe. Does help us get found on the channel here on the Bring Me Sports YouTube channel. Does also notify you every time we post a new video here. We'll talk to you again tomorrow, or on Monday, with another topic across Minnesota sports. Talk to you then, Minnesota sports.